This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. I have a competition in me. I want no one else to succeed. I hate most people. There are times when I look at people and I see nothing worth liking. I want to earn enough money I can get away from everyone. It's There Will Be Blood, and this film is lit. Hello, and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We have quite a full episode with all but one of our normal segments, so we're going to jump right into it, talking about There Will Be Blood. If you have not seen it or read Oil, here's a brief summary in Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
So I read the first 160-ish pages of Oil, !
Yes, which when we were doing research for the prequel, according to Paul Thomas Anderson,
Yes.
that is roughly of the amount of the book that he used. And then after that was like, this goes other places that I'm not interested in using. So, yeah.
So the first 160th pages goes like this. A father, J. Arnold Ross, and son, Bunny, are driving across California to some sort of business meeting. We find out that the father is big in the business of oil and is teaching his 13-year-old son that business as well. They travel to a town where oil was recently discovered to try and make a deal to lease land from a neighborhood group. While at that meeting, Bunny meets a boy named Paul Watkins who ran away from his family's ranch. Paul tells Bunny why he's running away and mentions offhand that there might be oil on the family ranch. Bunny is impressed by the older boy and wishes to befriend him, but Paul leaves before Bunny can do so. The meeting ends up a bust because the neighbors can't agree on how to divide up the income from the lease. A little while later, Bunny convinces his father to go quail hunting on the Watkins family ranch by telling him that there might be oil there. They meet the rest of the Watkins family, who are very poor and very religious, except for their daughter Ruth, who wants to be like Paul. Father and son do find evidence of oil, leading Mr. Ross to benevolently buy out the Watkins family's mortgage, which was close to default, as well as purchasing nearly every other plot of land around it. They don't drill for oil right away, and in the meantime, the two keep a cabin nearby the Watkins ranch and become close to Ruth as well as Paul, who has returned from his travels. Eventually, one of the big oil companies strikes oil on the other side of the mountain, giving father and son an excuse to drill on their land without it seeming like that's why they purchased the land in the first place. As they drill down, a man falls into the well and is killed. They persevere and strike oil. The oil derrick catches fire and they have to use dynamite to stop the blaze, but they're still happy because they struck the mother lode of oil.
All right, and here is a brief synopsis of There Will Be Blood. It's most of this is sourced from Wikipedia, by the way. It's 1898. Daniel Plainview is a prospector. After scoring a small silver claim, Daniel moves on to oil, establishing a drilling company near LA. After one of his workers is killed in an accident, he adopts the man's young baby as his own, H.W. Plainview. A decade later, Daniel is approached by a man named Paul Sunday, who tells him of an oil deposit under his family's property in Little Boston, California, in exchange for a finder's fee. Daniel investigates the farm, meeting Paul's identical twin brother, the local preacher Eli Sunday. After finding oil, Daniel purchases the land from the Sunday family after haggling with Eli, who realizes Daniel is trying to scam his father and their family out of the profitable land. Before drilling begins, Eli asks for permission to bless the oil well, but a reticent Daniel refuses, and shortly after, the drilling operation suffers several accidents, including one that deafens H.W. Eli demands the agreed upon payment for his church, but an angry Daniel beats and humiliates him in front of other men. Later, a man arrives claiming to be Daniel's half-brother Henry. Him and Daniel grow close, causing a struggling HW to become jealous and attempt to kill Henry by burning him to death as he sleeps, which causes Daniel to send him away to a school for the deaf. Reminiscing about their childhood home, Daniel becomes suspicious of Henry's story and confronts him about it one night. Henry confesses that he knew the real Henry and took his identity after he died from tuberculosis in the hope that Daniel would give him a job. Daniel murders this fake Henry in a fit of rage. The next morning, Daniel is discovered by one of the local farmers whose land he's the only person whose land he had not been able to purchase when he was buying up land for his oil mining operation, and is coerced into getting baptized in Eli's church in order to get permission from this farmer to build an oil pipeline to the sea on his land. Eli uses this baptism to humiliate Daniel for abandoning his son in front of the whole town. Sometime later, Daniel reunites with HW and Eli leaves Little Boston on missionary work. Finally, we jump forward to the late 1920s where HW has now married Mary Sunday, the younger sister of Eli Sunday, and visits Daniel, who now lives as a reclusive alcoholic in a large mansion. HW tells Daniel that he wants to dissolve their partnership so that he can pursue his own drilling in Mexico, and Daniel, very upset by this, mocks him for being deaf and reveals that HW's true origin was that of an orphan that Daniel adopted, which HW was not aware of up until this point. He thought he was his birth son. HW then tells Daniel that he's glad they aren't related and leaves. Sometime later, Eli comes to visit Daniel at his mansion, hoping to sell the rights to the final plot of land in Little Boston, revealing that he has lost all of his money in the stock market crash. Daniel agrees to buy the land on the terms that Eli confessed that he was a false prophet all along and that God is a mere superstition, which he does, before revealing that there is no more oil on the land because he already drank it up. He then murders Eli with a bowling pin, and the movie ends. All right, there you go. You're caught up if you have not read or watched Oil/There Will Be Blood. We have Guess Who, and I'm surprised because there's quite a few of them, considering that we weren't sure how much this would even come from the book. So let's go ahead and get to it.
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay.
He was a big figure of a man, filling every inch of the opulent overcoat. His cheeks were rosy and always fresh from the razor, but at a second glance you noted little pockets of flesh around his eyes and a network of wrinkles. His hair was gray, he had had many cares and was getting old. His features were big and his whole face round, but he had a solid jaw which he could set in an ugly determination.
Okay, so to me, this sounds fairly like Daniel Plainview, who is not named Daniel Plainview in the book, but in particular, the rosy cheeks, the little pockets of flesh around his eyes. Daniel Day-Lewis in this movie has the world's worst bags under his eyes for like much of the film. The gray hair, he doesn't have gray hair for like much of the movie, although at the end he may be going a little bit gray. And I'm also thinking it's possible that this could be, I doubt it, but we could do like a opening out of like at the end of the story kind of, and then going backwards or something. And this is an older description of our protagonist. But even if not, it might not be. I'm going to say this is Daniel Plainview.
Yes, it is the character that is Daniel Plainview.
What is his name
His
again?
name is J. Arnold Ross.
Okay.
But the book is more or less from his son's perspective, so he's dad of the whole book.
Was I correct in that? Is this out of time at all, or is this?
No, the book is told in linear.
chronologically?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if, maybe that we were like seeing the end, the fallout, and then jumping back, which I wasn't for sure. But so he's just slightly different looking than Daniel Day-Lewis is. But there are definitely some elements in there that tie directly to Daniel Day-Lewis's character in the film.
He was a pretty boy, still brown, with wavy brown hair, tumbled by the wind, and bright brown eyes, and a good color because he lived outdoors.
He lived outdoors. I would think that maybe this is one of the Sunday boys. They kind of live out on the land. I'm trying to think of who else would be a young. You said, and I'm only Normally I would say this, oh, maybe this is H.W. Plainview, the son character, but you just said it's from the book is from the perspective of him, and this is written
I said more or less from the perspective of him.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to say that this is H.W. Plainview.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
His name is not H.W. Plainview. He's J. Arnold Ross Jr., but everyone calls him Bunny.
Okay. Bunny. There you go.
He had pale yellow hair, which had not been cut for some time. He had pale blue eyes, which protruded slightly and gave him an eager look. He had a long neck with a conspicuous Adam's apple. His legs had grown too fast for the pair of worn trousers which were supposed to cover them, and which revealed shoes without socks.
Well, this feels exactly like Eli Sunday to me. I'm going to say this is Eli Sunday.
It is Eli Sunday.
Pretty spot on, honestly, other than, I mean, his hair's a little long in the film, but it's not, I guess it just says it hasn't been cut for some time, so who knows exactly how long that is. But that, his hair is a little bit longer in the film, but it's not, like, particularly long. But everything else, this looks like Paul Dano in the film. And the shoes without socks felt like, I don't even know if that's a thing in the movie, but as a preacher, feel like he would go, well, I'd also go shoeless, but sockless feels like it makes sense. Anyways, sorry. I just think that
It's a great detail. Sense. Okay, last one. She was bareheaded and bare-legged, and you saw that she was outgrowing the patched and faded calico dress which was her only covering. She was a thin child and gave the impression she was pale, in spite of her brownness. It was an anemic brown, without much red in it. She had the blue eyes of the family and a round, domed forehead with hair pulled straight back and tied with a bit of old ribbon.
This feels pretty close to the what we see of this character in the movie, because I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is Mary Sunday, the daughter that H.W. marries eventually.
Her name is Ruth in the book, but it is, yes, the same character.
There you go. Yeah, that was, I mean, the blue eyes of the family helps tying it back with the previous one. Because Eli had blue eyes, but yeah, it totally tracks. So those characters all kind of have a direct, obviously, because I legitimately wasn't even sure if
I had no idea
Daniel Plainview was going to even have a direct, like, you know what I mean? Like, I thought we might be like in the land of very loose adaptations where it's like, hey, this is a story about a guy who mined oil, and like I didn't think we would have, or not even didn't think, I wasn't sure if we would even have any like direct comparison character wise, especially beyond like the main character, and even that I wasn't sure. So it's interesting to know that there's 4 of the main characters, and in the movie Mary plays a very minimal role. She's in like a handful of scenes.
She's fairly minimal in the book as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, I have quite a few questions to get into in Was That in the Book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
So like I said just a second ago, I wasn't sure how much of this would have ended up coming from the book, because I when I read and was doing research for the prequel, I read Paul Thomas Anderson talking about how, he almost didn't want to call it an adaptation because it's so loosely based or blah, blah, blah. And there were so many other elements from other things. But that being said, I still have quite a few questions. So let's just get into it. At the opening of the film, we open up with a long segment of no dialogue. The first 15 minutes of this movie or something like that. There's not a lick of dialogue. It is just Daniel Plainview going about his business. And in the opening, he's mining for gold or silver, mining for precious metals. And as he's mining, he ends up he blows up at something, and he ends up falling down into the mine and like breaking his leg, and has to drag himself out of it, and then drags himself through the desert for God knows how far to go get his gold and silver claim on the mine that he just found. And I wanted to know if that came from the book, because it was a very striking character introduction in the film.
No, none of that is from the book.
Okay.
It's the protagonist. It's mentioned that before he was an oil man, he owned a crossroads store, which
so he's like
like a
store owner.
yeah, a store. I assume is like a general store type place.
It would seem like.
I tried to look it up, and there's a chain of stores called Crossroads now, so that was all I could find.
I mean,
tried
it
to
sure
Google
sounds
it.
like Crossroads store is like a general, like, you know,
Yeah.
you're at the Crossroads. We got
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff that you would need on your journey or whatever. But yeah, anyways, so I thought that opening, you know, like it very clearly quickly establishes the kind of man that Daniel Plainview is, obsessed with wealth and acquiring it at the expense of all other things. Like I said, I mean, to be fair, it's not like once he falls in, he has to drag himself somewhere. He's just going to sit in the desert and die. But he doesn't drag himself to the doctor. He drags himself to the claims however that worked.
Wherever you go to get your payout.
And your and like claim the land essentially.
Yeah.
He gets a claim on like the mine that he opened up so that nobody else can mine it. And that's the first place he goes because you see him laying on the ground with like a board tied around his leg in the office or whatever. As we move forward, he moves from mining silver and gold. Now he's moving on to oil, and he opens up an oil mine near LA, and he gets a small crew working for him. And one of these crew members is this guy who has a young baby with him. And they've struck oil at this point, and they're dumping it into a big pit for storage, which I guess is it makes sense. That's how you stored it. You just dug a hole and dumped it in there until you could ship it somewhere or whatever. But at one point, one of the character who has the baby, who's the actual father of, and we'll soon realize or find out that this is H.W. Plainview or becomes H.W. Plainview. He's like looking at the oil and he bends down. He's doing something, but he gets some on his finger and he like Ash Wednesdays the baby with oil. And I thought that was a very that H.W. Plainview was literally baptized by oil. You know, makes a lot of sense. And I was wondering if that came from the book.
No, I encountered no babies in the section of the book that I read.
Okay. So speaking of said baby, that worker is then subsequently killed in an accident where like a beam breaks and falls and just hits him and kills him. And I wanted to, and ultimately then Daniel Plainview ends up adopting the child that this guy was raising, who we assume was from some relationship that it, you know, maybe who knows. And there's no mother in the picture, shall we say. And so Daniel ends up taking this baby and adopting him, and wanted to know if the adoption element comes from the book of adopting like one of his workers' kids.
No, his son in the book is just his son.
Just his actual son.
I did think that this was something better in the movie. But at least for where the movie like goes versus what the book is doing. I thought it added some dimension to his character.
Yeah.
It also kind of removes the complication of the rest of the family since it's just like him and his son all the time.
Yeah. I really liked it. I thought it was it made the story even more heartbreaking because you know, there's something very endearing about somebody, you know, adopting a child and just like taking care of them, you know, that isn't like born to them. And so it immediately makes us like his character, and their relationship, at least initially, when he's very young, seems rather sweet, and like he really cares about this kid and that sort of thing. And it's not, I don't even think it seems. I think that is the case when he's, you know, for a while, before his greed gets the better of him. But I really like that angle of it, but I also like that it establishes this place where it's like it gives him something to lose in a way that feels more heartbreaking than I think if it had been his actual child for some reason. Because he found this family and created it, and then he drives it away in a way that is, again, I don't know what it is specifically about it that to me made it even more, made their relationship, where their relationship ends up even more heartbreaking than if it had just been his actual son. I think it's because you know, if he had just been stuck with a kid for like maybe like let's say he's that worker and he got some woman pregnant and she died in childbirth or whatever, and he kind of ends up just stuck with this kid, or she dies of, you know, cholera or something, and he ends up stuck with this kid. It gives him no age or far less agency in in getting that child.
Yeah.
And so when he drives him away later, it's like, well, maybe he just got stuck in a situation raising this kid that he didn't really want. And it was just like, and that's kind of what happens. But the fact that he kind of gets stuck with it in the film, but he like makes the active choice to adopt this kid in a way that makes the fallout later to me more heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I guess.
No, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Speaking of the son, we then jump forward. So he adopts him as the kid's like a baby, like 1 year old or something. We then jump forward about 9 or 10 years, and him and Daniel and HW are in this town pitching their business proposition that will come. We'll drill the oil in your town if you sell your land to us or whatever, because we're oil people or whatever. But he introduces his son as his partner. He says, "This is my son and my partner, HW Plainview," and the kid is like literally like 8 or 9 years old, and it's very funny to me. And I wanted to know if in the book, his son, he like touts him as his partner when he's like a little kid.
Not really. Kind of. Not really. So his son is 13 when the book starts.
Okay, so a few years older.
He goes everywhere with his dad because his dad wants him to learn the oil business. Like he's learning on the ground. And he does eventually become his father's business partner, but not until he's older, like in an official capacity.
Right.
The dad in the book does occasionally like imply that Bunny is his business partner, but it's more of like a cheeky, jokey kind of thing. It
doesn't feel like he's joking in the film.
It doesn't.
It feels like he's being dead serious when he says that. At least it seems like it.
Which is why I say it's kind of different.
Yeah, because that would be a reasonable thing of like you could see in like an offhand conversation, be like, oh yeah, my part, kind of joking about his like young son being his business partner. But in that, I mean, he's pitching their he's pitching their business proposition to this town, like dead serious. And he says, "This is my son and my partner." And I love the camera pulls back and it's like this little kid. Yeah. It's like, okay.
Also looking dead serious.
Yeah, the kid is dead serious. The kid is like, yeah, it's great. I love that scene. It's that whole scene is just delightful. But yeah, okay. So definitely they took it in a more serious direction. So there end up, as I mentioned in the summary, Paul Sunday comes and is like, "Hey, my family's land has oil. If you give me some money, I'll tell you where it is, blah, blah, blah." And then they go to the land and they find that it does have oil. And then they have dinner with the family and he's propositioning them to buy the land from them. And he's essentially trying to scam them out of their land. But then Eli, who's there, knows that there's oil and knows that this guy's up to no good and he's trying to buy our land for cheap, even though he's probably going to mine oil or, drill for oil. And so he kind of haggles it to a place where it's at least not completely outrageous. And I wanted to know if that whole scene, that element of him trying to scam this family out of their land and all that comes from the book. Because it's our first, I think it's probably our first sight in the film of, beyond like the initial character setup stuff, of like the kind of businessman that Daniel Plainview is, which is an asshole. Because like up until this point, he's like a committed, like dedicated, like striving to like make money and stuff, and doesn't put up with nonsense. Because in the scene before this in that town they were in, he's like, "Let's get out of here. They don't know what they're doing. Like this is chaos, or it's not worth our time." So he's very like a hardline business guy. But in this one, it's like, I'm gonna take advantage of this family, because I can.
Yes.
And I wanted to know if that came from the film or from the book.
Okay, so I have thoughts on this.
Okay.
So he does scam this family out of their land, and he does it because he can.
Yeah.
Nobody haggles with him in the book, so there's not that element to it. There's not like a character who knows or like who kind of has some kind of inkling of what the value of the land is. And this was actually something that I preferred in the book, and I'm going to attempt to explain what it was that I preferred.
Okay.
So it's not this scene specifically necessarily, but it's more of an overall vibe. So the character of this protagonist, this like oil man, the father character, through him, we're getting a critique of capitalism. And
Yes.
it's two kind of different critiques from the movie versus the book. And what the movie gives us is this character who is so obsessed with succeeding at business that he'll literally do or say anything, and he grows progressively more unhinged the harder he tries and the more he succeeds. And this is kind of the first time we see it in the movie, where we can see him start to get like frustrated and start to lose control a little bit.
His anger starts
this
to kind of
scene.
bubble up more so.
And which, okay, and that's its own style of critique of this type of like person that is created by capitalism.
Yeah.
What we get in the book, I personally found more interesting. It's a little more subtle. What we get in the book is a man who is so good at walking the walk and talking the talk. He's so smooth. He's such a smooth operator that you find yourself just getting swept up by him and what he has to say, as all of the other characters are. Like, he's a snake.
Yeah.
But he's styled himself to be so down to earth and sympathetic that even as a reader, you're like, well, maybe he's right.
Yeah.
And then right after, like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait just a second.
Yeah. That's definitely a slightly different.
Yeah, it's a slightly different style of critique.
Of capitalist monster,
Yes.
for sure. Yeah, it's just slightly different. And I think it is because I think that element of that element is there in Daniel Plainview in the film, like initially, but he's more of a, it's less of like a, like getting swept up in his charisma and more of like he's just so no nonsense and so like, he seems to have it all figured out in a way that is like, you're like, well, this, I mean, there is an element of that, because I think that is like what you, when you're watching him talk and he's doing his like, I'm an oil man,
there is definitely an element of that in the film. I just found what the book was doing with his character to be so fascinating. And then there's this extra like layer where you're viewing it through the eyes of his son, who idolizes his father, but who is growing up and is starting to like get the inkling that like maybe not everything his dad does is above board. And it was really interesting to me.
No, it is. Because I could see both being very interesting. I was also fascinated with the idea of, because I in the film I loved that he's that, but then when he gets pushback, he very quickly loses that and becomes like just kind of an asshole. Which is the same type. It's what you see from people like Elon. Like we're going through it on Twitter right now. Like that is like as soon as they get any sort of pushback, they just like lose any.
They just unravel
persona or any sort of facade of like professionalism and like having their shit together and just become this like tyrannical infant. Like it's just like, what is even happening? And I feel like that is the character we get in the film, which I find fascinating and timely and timeless in a way that is, but both are like I can totally see the type what you're talking about from the book and see how that would also be fascinating in a completely different way. But yeah, it's cool, interesting. All right, I was wondering, so if there is an antagonist in the book, because in the film, and I hesitate to even say antagonist. I guess antagonist is the right word, because Eli Sunday kind of becomes the antagonist to Daniel Plainview in the film a little bit. There are other sort of, there's a lot of things going on, but Eli Sunday is the foil to Daniel Plainview. And I want to know if there is a character like that in the book, and if that character exists, are they a preacher? Because the thing that I found really interesting in the film is that I love the idea that Eli Sunday is, and you get this so quickly from just a handful of interactions with him, that he is just as obsessed with success and is angling to make a name for himself just as hard as Daniel, but doing it through the purview of religion. His desires initially seem like more selfless, at least I think to if you weren't looking super close, it would feel a little more selfless. It's coded in the language of religion in a way
Yes.
that makes it, to people who aren't to people that aren't me, might I immediately see through. And I say me, the movie makes it pretty clear. It's not like particularly subtle that he is interested in this for his own personal reasons and not because he's like such a devoted shepherd of the Lord or whatever. But I just love that he's clearly just as selfishly motivated as Daniel. And I love that we're clearly commenting on the two things that built and will ultimately destroy this company, or this country, in my opinion, which are capitalism and Christianity. They're kind of two sides of the same coin in this film. These two characters who are, it's because they're both antagonists. Like, they're both not antagonists. They're both assholes. Daniel Plainview is the protagonist of the film, but he's also terrible. He's the worst. He's a horrible person. And Eli Sunday is just as, maybe not just as awful as him, but awful in a different way and just similarly motivated. They are just two sides of the same coin. And it was just such a fascinating exploration of those two characters to me. And I wanted to know if Eli Sunday and the dynamic he has as a preacher with Daniel Plainview, if any of that came from the book.
There's a seed of it in the book. I would say that there's not much conflict between those two characters. They definitely don't particularly like each other.
Yeah.
But they aren't like that same like two sides of the same coin as they are in the movie. I did enjoy that element of the film. The book has some light criticism of religion, not particularly a lot.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really have an antagonist other than capitalism itself.
Yeah. Well, is capitalism is the antagonist, or because I would argue that in the film, at least, that capitalism is.
I'm saying in the book.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
There's not like a person who is
like at odds.
At odds with
Daniel in the same way, or
with the main characters.
The oil man.
Yes.
Yeah. I will say the movie is definitely specifically I would argue that it's not a critique of like religion in general necessarily. I mean, to some extent maybe, but because Daniel Plainview is maybe an atheist, maybe not. I don't know. His sort of religious views are never explicitly expounded upon, except for at the end. You know, he's say God is a superstition or whatever. But like, I would argue that the movie's critique is more of a specific brand of religion and Christianity and like faith healers and prosperity gospel. I would say that the book is the same.
Yeah. I don't think Upton Sinclair had any great love for like evangelical
Christianity and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, there's this line in the film that I really liked that I wanted to know if it came from the book, because so Daniel Plainview at one point is talking to the town, and it's like when they're getting ready to open up the oil derrick for the first time or whatever, and he's getting ready to make his like little speech before they open the oil derrick, and he says, "I'm better at digging holes in the ground than making speeches." And I was like, but are you though? Because that's kind of like it's one of those things where it's very funny to me. Like, he says that to everybody, and that was one of those moments to me that feels like reminiscent of the character you're describing in the book, who says things like that, but he knows full well that and he's not that he's bad at, you know, drilling for oil or whatever. Like, he's fine, but like, I think he's well aware that his skill is manipulating people.
Yes.
And and talking a good game. And so I really enjoyed that line of, "I'm better at digging holes in the ground than I am making speeches." I'm like, all right, sure you are, bud. Does that line come from the book?
That specific line is not from the book, but I think it does capture part of the character from the book, which is a similar thing of acting as though he is this very humble, like salt of the earth laborer. Yeah.
Which he does labor, but
that's part of the manipulation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So then they start the the drilling gets going, and they have the accidents that I mentioned earlier. And the big accident is they have it's called like a blowover or something. I can't remember what it's called. There's a name. What did you get that in the book at all? A blowout, maybe.
I think it
something
was.
like that. Where basically the pressure. There's an issue with pressure, and it just. It's the thing you always see in like movies with oil things, where it just like shoots oil way up into the air, and then if there's a spark anywhere, it can catch fire, which is what happens. So it catches fire. And it burns all their like oil drilling infrastructure down, and they're all kind of standing around watching it. And his partner, Franklin something or whatever, is sitting there like just staring at it. And Daniel Plainview turns to him, and this is after his son has been injured. His son, so he doesn't know to what extent yet. He's alive, but he got hurt somehow because he was up on the oil derrick when the pressure thing happened. And he turns to his partner and says, "What are you looking so miserable about? There's a whole ocean of oil under our feet, and no one can get at it except for me." And him saying that like immediately after his child is almost killed, and all of this is burning down, but all he can see is the dollar signs. I thought was great, and I wanted to know if like that exchange came from the book.
There is a line that's very close. Because there is after they drill for oil on this land that he got from the religious family.
Yeah, so like the same thing.
Yeah. They do have a blowout.
Yeah.
And it catches fire. And he says to his son, "Why, boy, we got an ocean of oil down underneath here, and it's all ours. Not a soul can get near it but us. Are you a frettin' about this measly little well?"
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very
similar. Similar for sure. Movie kind of ups the stakes with his kid being injured, and then him like not really caring about that anymore.
Yeah, and I did like that. I thought it made a lot of thematic sense to have his son be quote unquote damaged by his father's quest for money and greatness.
Yeah. You're using, just to clarify, you're using damaged in quotes there because for people, losing your hearing doesn't necessarily mean you're like leading a lesser life or anything. Right. You can be a perfectly happy, amazing life being deaf or whatever, but he does lose something that he had previously. His son is injured from this in an irreparable way.
Yes, and it does go on to affect their relationship in a major way as well.
Yeah, but just kind of clarifying what you're getting at there. So after this all happens, Eli comes and it's like, "Hey, this all could have been avoided if you let me bless the oil well or whatever." And he's like, whatever. But then Eli comes because he wants his money. At one point early in the process, Daniel had promised to like give his church some money or something in exchange for letting him drill on the land. And Eli's coming to collect, and Daniel is in full psychopath mode at this point because he is the whole issue with his kid, but then and everything that happened, and he's just not having it, and he beats up Eli in a mud puddle in front of everybody, and basically like makes fun of him and humiliates him in front of everybody. And then right after that, Eli goes home and does the same thing to his dad in very much the same way that Daniel just did it to him, because he's mad at his father for selling the land to Daniel and letting him kind of come and take advantage of them. And I wanted to know if that came from the book, because I thought that was a really fascinating sort of illustration of the cycle of abuse and stuff that can take place and blah, blah, blah. Anyways.
No, none of that happens in the book.
Fair enough. All right. Not in the book. All right, cool. And no like high school fights in the book.
No, I don't think
rubs
so.
Mud on faces or anything like that.
If it is, it's in the latter 400 some odd pages.
Fair enough. So we jump ahead quite a bit here into my next question, and this is after Henry, the supposed Henry Plainview, his brother, half brother, shows up. Played by Benny from who plays in The Mummy, Kevin J. O'Connor. Actually playing a white guy in this one instead of whatever he's playing in The Mummy, which I'm not sure if we ever know exactly what ethnicity Benny is supposed to be, but I don't believe it's white. So anyways, he shows up in this one and he's pretending to be, we'll find out later, he's pretending to be Daniel's brother. And they're kind of late one night having a conversation, and Daniel is kind of like explaining they're both been drinking. He's kind of like pouring out like about himself and trying to figure out if this is something that he was like born, like the way he kind of views the world is something he was born with. Is Henry like this? Because he thinks again at this point that it's his brother. And he has this great line. I used it in the opening where he says, "I have a competition in me. I want no one else to succeed. I hate most people." I want to know if that line came from the book.
That specific line is not from the book, but I think it is kind of an exaggerated version of one character trait of this character from the book. He never says it outright, but there are kind of little breadcrumbs here and there telling us that he does think that most other people are stupid and self-serving, which is why he then feels entitled to just take whatever he wants and do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
Because everybody else is stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, and that's definitely what you get from the overall character of Daniel in the film. I actually really did like this scene. I think some people might argue that it feels a little like on the nose that he's just kind of like saying this. But I think it's a really interesting moment where a narcissist like this, drinking a little bit and alone and with somebody that he thinks he can truly trust, who is like his brother.
Yeah.
And it's like trying to explore himself.
Yeah,
and
like an attempt at introspection.
An attempted introspection by a complete like psychopathic narcissist is, and this is how it feels like this is how they would say it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like, I hate everyone. I want no one else to succeed. It's just like super like on the nose, like just kind of stating their ethos or whatever. And I thought that, again, I think some people might be like, it feels a little cheesy or whatever, but I thought it was just incredible. I thought that scene was fantastic. But line does not come from the book. So he does have a kid. So is there a Henry plot line? I guess I should ask that. Does anybody show up pretending to be or claiming to be his half brother?
No.
Okay, well then that question doesn't matter.
And I read several synopses, and I don't think that there's anything in the rest of the book that's like correlated to that at all.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting choice because I think it does give us an avenue to explore, like we were just talking about, have him be more
to give
open.
him another adult to interact with.
Yeah, in a way where he feels can be vulnerable.
Yes, feels a little more comfortable and vulnerable.
Yeah, and it allows him to, like you said, do some introspection. I think that was a good addition.
Yeah, for sure.
So, moving forward even more, he has now sent his son, because Henry, and this was what my last question was going to be about whether or not Henry, or HW tries to kill Henry, like he does in which I'm not even sure necessarily. This is what it says in the Wikipedia, is that he tries to kill Henry because he's jealous.
It seems like, because he puts the gasoline or whatever all around his bed.
Yeah,
but
and maybe that is what's going on. To me, it almost, because he's young enough, it almost felt like he could just be like not really thinking through what, I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, but so after this all happens, Daniel decides he needs to send HW off to a school for the deaf because he can't help him anymore. He's deaf, and he's like, I don't know how to handle that, which obviously you wouldn't know. It'd be very tough back then where you have no way to get resources or anything like that. So he ends up sending him off to this school. After that, Standard Oil shows up, who's like one of the big oil companies, and is like, hey, we're willing to give you like $1 million something, which back then was literally like $1 billion.
Yeah.
Like just all the money.
Oh yeah, that was fuck off money.
That was just not that, like all the money you could ever possibly. $1 million in 90 something is like just all of the money in the world. But they like offer him like $1 million to sell them, the oil, and they'll do everything, blah blah blah. But he ends up turning it down because the guy from Standard Oil ends up making a comment about, and that way you can go spend time with your boy or whatever. Like you can go, and he takes this as a slight that he's like insulting his like that he's not a good father or whatever.
Yeah.
And like telling him how to parent his child. And so he turns it down and is like, no, I'm going to build a pipeline. I'll do it myself. And I really enjoyed this scene because I thought, well, go. Is it front? Does another oil company show up and offer him an out? Does that come from the book?
No.
Okay.
I did also enjoy that scene, but none of it is from the book.
Okay. I just really liked the idea that he has this out, and he could just go. He could get everything. He just be richer than anybody has ever been, basically. or anybody could ever need to be back. Again, $1 million,
Yeah.
but you never would run out of money and your children's children would never run out of money. Like you're fine. But he turns it down because he feels guilty he invents this, like the guy's like, what are you, I'm not trying to like.
Yeah, he invents this slight.
And it does seem like it really didn't, in the scene, it did not feel to me like the oil guy was trying to like coyly be an asshole.
No, I think he was trying to like identify with him.
I think he was genuinely trying to like, just do a deal and was like, hey, you can spend time. Like, I don't think he was like, being like a kind of like, casually being an asshole, like, like trying to prod him around. Like, legitimately was just trying to like have a conversation, and Daniel turns this into this big thing. And I thought that was such a great scene just because and from here on out, this is like we're on the downfall. We're in
we're in the downward slide,
the destruction, the death spiral of Daniel Plainview. And I just thought that making it so obvious that he is so guilty, he feels so guilty about how he handled the situation with his son that he blows up any perceived like mention of it into this big thing because he can't deal with the fact that he did this. And so he assumes everybody else is like giving him shit about it. And I thought that was just a really great scene. I really enjoyed it. So moving quite a bit forward, after he ends up murdering Henry, which that character's not in the book, so we don't need to worry about any of the stuff that happens there. But he ends up murdering Henry, or the fake Henry. He then is met by Bandy, who's the one guy who he didn't buy, or whose land he didn't buy when he was buying up all the land. And Bandy comes to him and is like, hey, if you want, and Daniel's like, hey, he's like, hey, I heard you want to build a pipeline through my land. Sure, you can do that, but you got to go confess and get baptized in the church. And Daniel's like, oh, fuck, all right, fine. And so he goes to church and he's like forced to eat shit in front of everybody and get baptized. And Eli like makes a big show out of this because Eli hates him at this point. And like, is like slapping him and telling him to confess his sins. And he makes him like yell over and over again that he's, and this is another meme from the movie. He's like, I've abandoned my boy. And I wanted to know if him yelling, I've abandoned my child, I've abandoned my child, I've abandoned my boy, any of that comes from the book.
Regrettably, none of that comes from the book.
Is there any element of in the book where they're split up or they have a falling out or anything like that, like the son and the father?
Not in the section that I read. I think there might be later on in the book, because I know that later on the son gets into like socialism.
Oh, okay.
So there might be, but I don't think there's anything quite like what we get in the movie.
There's nothing, and there's definitely nothing where like as a child he like sends him away to boarding school and that creates anything like that. Okay. All right. So getting to the end of my questions here, and I'm not going to have a ton more questions because I'm pretty sure a lot of this is not in the book, but do you know how long the book takes place over? Because I wasn't really expecting, and it makes sense in retrospect, I don't know why I didn't, but that this film takes place over like 40 years or something like that. Like we start in 1890, like 1898 or something like that. Yeah. And then we end up in like the early 1930s or very, very late 1920s. So like 30 years. Yeah. And I wanted to know if the book spans a similar timeline.
So I believe the book starts sometime around 1912. When the book opens, Bunny is 13, and then the narrative follows him through 18 that I know of. Like, I know the book follows him, like, through high school, and then he goes to college. We also get the start of the First World War around the time that he starts high school, I think. I don't think we go much further past that, though. So it takes place over the span of, like, 4 to 6 years.
Yeah, because I mean, the movie it's very critical for the end of the film that we get to the stock market crash of 29.
Right.
Which is funny because we don't actually, I don't recall seeing, we see 1927, and that's like when
that's when they get
married. And then, but I don't remember seeing another time thing, but then we would have to be later than 1929 when Eli shows up because he says he lost all his money in the stock market crash, which was 29. So I don't know exactly. We don't know exactly how long it's been in the final scene of the film, we don't know exactly when that takes place, but it's got to be post 1930. So, and we started pre 1900, so it's been at least 30 years over the course of the film. And my final question, because I have to ask, although I do know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Does "I drink your milkshake, I drink it up"? Does that come from the book?
It's definitely not from the book.
Okay, so I knew that. In particular, I had looked this up. So Anderson said that the line in the final scene, "I drink your milkshake," was paraphrased from a quote by former Secretary of the Interior and U.S. Senator from New Mexico, Albert Fall, speaking before a congressional investigation in the 1920s oil-related Teapot Dome scandal.
Right, which is what this book was written around.
Anderson said he was fascinated to see that word milkshake among all this official testimony. But in 2013, an independent attempt to locate the statement in Fall's testimony proved unsuccessful. And an article published in Case Western Reserve Law Review suggested that the actual source of the paraphrased quote may have instead been remarks in 2003 by Senator Pete Domenici of New Mexico during a debate over drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And in those remarks, Domenici stated, "The oil is underground and it is going to be drilled and come up. Here is a giant reservoir underground. Just like a curved straw, you put it underground and maneuver it, and the milkshake is way over there, and your little child wants the milkshake, and they sit over here in their bedroom where they're feeling ill, and they just gobble it up from way down in the kitchen, where you don't even have to move the mix master that made the ice cream for them. You don't have to take it up to the bedroom." This describes the actual drilling that is taking place, which to me that sounds very likely in like where he drew the, he's talking about like, I'm over here.
Yeah, I'm over here. The straw is
like, and you gobble it up. Like that feels like where it came from. So yeah, I think that's probably the most likely because again, so that was what I was able to find. That's on Wikipedia. There's like a whole section about just that line apparently. So. All right. That is all of my questions. I do not have a Lost in Adaptation, so we're going to get right into what Katie thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
All right. None of my sections are like particularly long because they're so different.
Yeah.
It's hard to compare when stuff is this different. But so first off, I get why the movie would change Bunny's name, but it was just so charmingly vintage. There was just something I really loved about it.
I really like HW because it's just like
it feels very old Western. Yeah.
Two initials for a first name for a kid is like such an old HW Plainview. It just feels But Bunny is also like that's very much like an old timey nickname for a kid.
There is some light criticism of the police at the beginning of this book that was really funny. It's specifically about like speed traps and like cops writing tickets for speeding. But at one point, the dad says something about a cop being a man whose occupation destroyed his faith in human nature. It was just like a very kind of funny section because it felt so modern from this book that was written in 1926.
Yeah. It's funny though, because that line, I think just that line in isolation, obviously, I think could be read not as a, like, I think you that's a thing you hear like thin blue line people say. Like,
is it?
Yeah. Like blue, like, I think there's a defense of cops that people would make that they see the worst parts of humanity. So that's why, like,
I was definitely
their faith in humanity has been destroyed because they deal with all these terrible people. And like, that's sort of the traditional, like, cliche of cops is they like become these cynical husks because they only deal with like the worst people, blah, blah, like that.
It definitely wasn't in defense of in the book. There was more.
Right. That's what I'm saying. In isolation, I'm sure in context and beyond that, but that being said, I think you can also read it the other way that like the actual occupation of being a cop destroys your faith in human nature. Not because of what you're exposed to, but by the nature of the job itself and what it's doing. Like, I think there's two ways to interpret that. But I just, when I saw this earlier, I was it kind of made me chuckle because I do think that there is again, like an interpretation of that from the perspective of police that makes them feel justified in being the worst people. So, anyways.
This is a tiny detail, but it would have been fun to see. So the house at the very beginning where all of the people are gathered and they're just like arguing and shouting, that house has a fancy spiral staircase in it in the book that leads to nowhere. Like, it's just there to make the house look fancier when you walk in.
I mean, to be fair, I would consider having a spiral staircase that led nowhere. That would be fun.
I just thought it was a fun detail.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that could, I like the idea of having a spiral staircase to nowhere.
So they do lose a man down the well in the book, as they do in the movie. I thought it was maybe a little more horrific in the book. He falls down like head first, like way deep down, and then he drowns in the mud.
Oh yeah, that's way worse.
And they have to fish him out like in pieces with a giant hook.
Yeah, no, that's way worse.
Yeah.
In the film, assuming it's the first one, he just like gets hit by a board and like crushes his head or whatever. You know, it's just like.
No, the second one.
The second one just gets hit by a pipe and like impaled and dies. Like, it was probably like killed instantly.
Yeah.
Whereas falling in face first into that's horrifying.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare.
And then I thought this was so interesting. After that man dies, the dad gives Bunny some letters from the man's family to read so that he can understand that that man was a person and not just like a worker drone, like a number on a page. And I thought it was really interesting because the book is sprinkled with little things like that.
Yeah.
In the dad's characterization, where you're like, but he's bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's the same thing that you see, like, it is that thing where it becomes, which I think is a thing you see with a lot of business owners, but like, people who are like the worst examples of capitalism have those moments where at least they've tricked themselves into thinking they're not, and they see themselves as like part of the reason they're able to be such efficient and horrifying monsters of capitalism is that they don't think of themselves that way. And it's from little moments like this where they're like, see, he was they're, you know, like, I think
it's a very interesting, I really enjoyed the dad's characterization in this book. It's very subtle. It's very fleshed out and interesting because you have moments like this. And then like, there's a lot in the book about how like, he really cares about his workers and he wants his workers to be very comfortable. And he pays them well so that they're happy.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, he's swindling people out of their land. And then like when we get to the First World War, they drop that like he's selling to the Allied forces and the Axis forces because he can.
Yep.
It's a very interesting characterization.
Yeah. And I think that again, that feels like very real. That is how the worst elements, pick your person, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, whatever. Pick your caricature of capitalist, demagoguery and evilness or whatever. And capitalist pig. And they all have elements of that where it's like, and it makes them more, and it's the same, it's that thing where it gives people, all the weirdos online who will jump in front of bullets for Elon Musk, is they will point to little things like that and be like, oh, well, look at this thing that they, blah, blah, blah. And it's just, it is. It's a very real portrayal of the way cogs within the capitalist machine work and sometimes don't even realize and do at the same time. Like I said, I don't know. It's complicated. I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
This is a random little thing that just made me laugh while I was reading this book. So when Bunny gets to high school, he joins like a fraternity or whatever, because I guess they had those at rich high schools in the 1910s. And the book says, Bunny, as we know, possessed the requirements of a fraternity career. He had Anglo-Saxon features and plenty of big sweaters and drove to school in a car of this year's model. And I really,
What year was this written?
love
I love that nothing has changed in 100 years.
that the requirements basically boil down to he's white and rich.
Yep.
Which, spoilers, that's still how
Yeah.
fraternities work.
Nothing has changed
But
in
then I
100
really
years.
love the addition of plenty of big
Yeah.
sweaters.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm 1/3 of the way there.
That's amazing.
Um,
They're 2/3.
yeah,
You have
yeah, it's
Anglo-Saxon
2/3,
features.
yeah.
Are you saying
That's
you're
fair.
claiming you're not white now?
Anglo-Saxon is like British, though, isn't it?
It's complicated, but yeah, it's like the generic,
Generic white.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'm 2/3 of the way there. I do not drive to school in a car of that year's model.
No.
However, a bunch of other random lines from this that I loved because I really enjoyed the writing style of this book. It was pleasant to have a lot of money, but you must set up a skeleton at the feast. And while you quaffed the wine of success, you must hear a voice behind you whispering, "Memento mori."
Yep. Yep.
Then your fairyland was turned into a slaughterhouse, where the many were ground up into sausages for the breakfast of the few. Very Upton Sinclair line
Yep.
right there, I feel like. The context of this next one is the religious family, who are the Watkins family in the book, but the Sunday family, they like speak in tongues and all that in the book. So that's the context for this. He began to bellow in an enormous voice that you would never have dreamed could be contained in a body of his size. And what he said was, but you couldn't reproduce it because no one can recollect a jabber of syllables. And anyhow, it would look too silly on a printed page. Like, go off, Upton Sinclair.
Just fucking blowing up, speaking in tongues. It's amazing.
Eli was a lunatic and a dangerous one, but a kind you couldn't put in an asylum because he used the phrases of religion. Yeah, I don't think Upton Sinclair had any great love for religion.
No, Upton Sinclair turns out based. Other than the anti-Semitism, I guess. All right, fine. And the racism. All right, so like kind of based in some ways, and other not. All right, fine. Kind of cringe in other ways, I guess.
And the context for this last one is after they start drilling for oil, and it's talking about like that very religious family, and all of the activity going on with the hubbub with the oil drilling. You could not help being impressed by so much activity, even though you knew it was the activity of Satan.
Yep. It's good. This is good stuff. Some of those first lines, I'll see if I can find. I won't be able to. I'll see if I can find it and put it in. I might put it in here. If not, I urge you to go look for this. A couple of those first lines that were more like capitalist critiques. There's a streamer I watch who I'm a fan of named Northern Lion, who was streaming. Somebody made Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? That they made a video game of it that came out like this year. I think it was an old one, but there's one that came out like this year, and he played it for a little bit, and you have a kid that comes out and plays with you, and there's this one little girl who would come out, and when they come out to like, because you can like cheat off their answers or whatever, and this little girl would come out, and I don't remember her name, but several times they would like ask her a question, like you'd answer a question, and then the host of the game would turn to her and be like, "Hey, Savannah," or whatever her name was, "Can you tell us a fun fact or whatever?" And they would like spout off a little pre-recorded line or whatever. And one of the times, and I think there was a couple of these, but one in particular that I remember, and it reminds me because they could have just subbed in some of these lines that Upton Sinclair wrote. But one of them is, she like wheels out, and it says, "Are you smarter than a fifth grader video game?" And you're like answering trivia questions about like, the most simple nonsense or whatever. She rolls out and they're like, "Hey, Savannah, can you tell us a fun fact?" And she goes, "Violence of the oppressed is not the same as violence of the oppressor." And the host is like, "Thanks." And then the game just keeps going. And it's just like, wait, what? And it's like little like it's a fifth grader is like hella bass and like spouting off revolutionary quotes in this like fucking game show. I'll see if I can find at least one of those quotes, but oh my god, it's so funny. And those first couple lines sounded like something she could have said in that video game.
So, Ava, thanks for attending. Why don't you tell us a fact about your favorite subject?
Violence of the oppressed is simply not the same as violence from the oppressor.
Great fact.
What the hell?
Gotta
She's
go to the next
based?
question.
Anyways, all right, it's time to find out what Katie thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
The whole like backstory opening section that you were talking about with where there was no dialogue, I thought was very ominous and spooky.
Yeah.
It was like a whole vibe.
Yeah.
Really set the tone for the rest of the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mentioned that the Sunday family is the Watkins family in the book.
Yeah.
I think Sunday is a much better name.
Absolutely.
It's a way more like cinematic, old westy sounding
thematically
name.
with Eli being a preacher.
Yeah.
Eli Sunday.
He's
like,
also a preacher in the book.
well,
but-
yeah, I know, but like making it Sunday.
Yes.
Like,
yeah, it
adds to
works
the-
better.
Yeah.
He does bless the well in the book. He just kind of does it, and our oil man guy is like whatever.
Yeah.
He doesn't really care. He's a guy who knows when to pick his battles.
Yeah.
I thought that Plainview not allowing Eli to bless the well made more thematic sense, especially
Yeah.
with the disasters that then follow.
I also think it makes sense because I really like the way it feels really realistic the way he handles it in the film, where he's
Yeah.
like initially Eli comes up to him about it and he's like, oh yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
And then it gets to it and he's just
like
ignores
nah.
it and just doesn't
Yeah.
like he doesn't like say no, he just blows right past it and is like, oh, bye, all right. Yeah.
Yeah. The scene where Daniel Plainview talks to Mary, and he's been like right after they start up the drilling,
Yeah.
and he like catches her as she's running by and like talks to her,
Yeah.
was so fucking creepy.
Yeah.
It was a really good scene. I hated it. She looked so upset the entire
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
We talked about a lot of the stuff that I had on this, so my list is kind of short. I really liked when HW gets back from the school for the deaf in San Francisco and he slaps his dad.
Yeah. I love that he hugs him initially when he's there with his teacher
Yeah.
and stuff, and then they walk like all the way, like they're like walking over and they stop and then he just starts slapping the shit out of him. Yeah.
Truly iconic. I liked that the movie just had HW marry Sunday.
Yeah.
Bunny doesn't marry Ruth in the book, which it's not a problem that I have with the book. I wasn't like, oh dang,
Oh, no,
I wanted
yeah.
them. I shipped it. I wanted them to
shipped
get married.
Yeah.
But I did think it made a lot of narrative sense.
Yeah.
To have them get together. And this is an overall thing. The section of the book that I read also doubles as a primer on how to drill for oil.
Yeah.
There's lots of like extended explanations of like how the drilling process works, and just like, okay, that's a thing I know now.
Yeah.
I could have done without reading so much about it, but it's a thing I know now, I guess.
Yeah, and we just kind of watch it happen in the film, and you kind of get a little bit, but we're not like going through the intricacies of how it happens. Like you get a little bit of stuff here and there about like kind of just from watching like kind of what's going on, but yeah, it's not super detailed or something the movie's super worried about you knowing how oil drilling works. So
Upton Sinclair was very worried about us
There you
knowing
go.
how it works.
There you go. All right, let's go ahead and talk about a few things that the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
I actually have quite a few details here. His very first speech that he's making to that like group of people who are all shouting. Yeah, quite a bit of that is pulled from the book. Like not a lot of it super verbatim, but like little phrases here and there were for sure pulled straight from the book. And then they're all like shouting and arguing, and he just like walks out.
Yeah.
And he's like, fuck this.
For people who were wondering, because I mentioned Paul F. Tompkins in the prequel, I thought he might be in more of the movie. That's the scene he's in, and I didn't even notice him. I went back and looked it up. He's standing like in the corner He's like an extra, basically. But he does have a line you can hear where at the end of it, when everybody starts yelling, he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, we gain nothing by losing our head." Like, you can kind of hear him, but he's like, you can barely even see him. So anyways, if anybody was like me, was like, where is Paul F. Tompkins? I'm looking for... As he's in the movie, but like barely.
The Sunday/Watkins Ranch is a goat farm. It's about the only thing they can farm. They do go there under the guise of quail hunting.
Oh, I was going to ask about that. So
Yeah.
that was a clever ruse.
And the scene where HW like gets oil on his shoe and he's like, "Look, Dad, oil."
Oh, yeah.
That's also from the book. And his dad says in the movie, "I won't give them oil prices, I'll give them quail prices." And that's not exact, but it's very close to something that he says in the book, which is, "I'll pay him a land price, but I ain't a going to pay him no oil price."
Yeah, very similar.
Yeah, very similar. Bandy being the only land holdout, and he does eventually get that land in
Is
the
it
book.
to build the pipeline, or is it
Just to drill.
just to drill?
Yeah. He does eventually get that land when the old man dies and his son is like,
Yeah, which is what
Yeah.
Eli comes to at the end, and
Yeah.
it's like, hey, Bandy died. You can, yeah.
and all the religious fervor and like speaking in tongues is pulled right from the book as well.
There you go. All right, we got a handful of odds and ends before we get to the final verdict. So in the opening where he's prospecting for gold or silver or whatever, he's down there and he's like pickaxing. Is that how you would pickaxing? That seems
I
weird.
guess. I don't
Anyways, picking axe? I don't know. Whatever. This is like attorneys general. But he's gonna blow up. He's gonna like blow a big chunk out of the wall. So he lights a stick of dynamite. But he lights it, and then he has to climb out of the hole. And
I
was
know,
like,
he lights it, and I was like, "What are you doing?"
I mean, I guess that makes sense if you don't want to waste a bunch of fuse. I don't know how much
Yeah.
fuse costs, because otherwise, you would think you would climb up and then have
Right,
the fuse
light
up
a
top,
really long fuse.
But maybe if you're running short on fuse or don't want to waste fuse or it's expensive or whatever. But the idea of lighting TNT in a tiny hole and then climbing out on a rickety old bridge like in time to get out there. And I love he's trying to like haul his tools up or whatever.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get them up in time and it just blows up and he's like, well, all right. I thought that whole thing was fascinating. The opening of this movie and throughout the whole movie, the score, you have a note about it right after this we'll get into. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was amazing. Especially this whole opening, which without any dialogue, you have these constant like dissonant, like throbbing strings playing, and it's throughout most of the movie, but in particular in this opening, they're going constantly over these opening scenes where he is having what is ostensibly like successful business. Like if this were a different movie, you might have like very different music here, where this is like, oh, we're introduced to the character, it's more exciting, it's more upbeat. He's struck gold, he's struck oil, like, oh wow, at least before we get to the part where like the workers get killed or whatever.
Right.
Like in these very initial opening scenes where he's succeeding, again, you would think you might have different music, but this throbbing dissonant string, like underlaying strings that play through the whole thing is such a visceral, like, causes such a visceral reaction, and it's so clear that the movie is like, no, none of this is good. This is all bad. Everything happening is not, oh yeah, no, look, you found gold, amazing. It's just like, and I thought that was amazing. And again, they plays throughout like the whole thing. It was one of the things I thought was really interesting is that the score like never stops in this movie.
Yeah.
There's like most scenes have that like background
Yes.
dissonant strings, which you were not a fan of.
Well, I can see why Paul. I can see why he wanted that score.
Paul Thomas Anderson.
Paul Thomas Anderson. I forgot his middle name,
Yeah.
so I dropped off. Because I've abbreviated to PTA. In my notes. I can see why he wanted that score. It was like it was written explicitly to make me anxious.
It was. That is the whole point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Narratively, thematically, I understand it. Personally, I hate it. I had a headache for the entire 2.5-hour runtime.
It did not give me a headache, but I could see why it would be like annoying but like I just was like, so I was into it. I liked it a lot.
This was a question not covered by Upton Sinclair, at least in the part of the book that I read. But is that truly how they harvested oil before they had oil derricks? Like they just hauled it up by the bucketful?
I would bet it is. It makes the most sense. I would bet. I'm sure
Good
it is
Lord.
because I feel like this movie was they seemed really like particular about, accurately portraying a lot of the stuff that was going on. So it seemed totally reasonable to me. It makes sense. Like, seems like a way you would do it. So going into this film, I was a bit sleepy. Like I don't remember why. I guess because we watched it Monday night, and so it was like Monday morning, and it was after so I was a little bit sleepy. Right after the time change, so it was an hour later than it normally would have been, like when we were watching this and stuff. And I was like, I'm worried I'm gonna doze off. And I did not even get close once. I was so riveted from the moment this movie started all the way to the end. Maybe a couple lulls here and there. But overall, like 90% of the movie, I was just like, this is riveting. Like I was an hour in and it didn't even feel like an hour. Like this to me, and your experience was at least slightly different. A 2 hour and 40-minute movie that did not feel like a 2 hour and 40-minute movie to me. But
that felt like 2 hours and 40 minutes.
That's fair.
Me.
I mean, it didn't feel like super short, but if you would have asked me if I didn't know how long it was and I just like watched it in a theater like back in the day, I would have been like, maybe almost 2 hours or something like that. I didn't feel like 240 to me.
There was a point in this movie where I really started to question if Paul was even real, or if that was actually Eli trying to do some kind of long con.
That would have been really fascinating.
That would have been very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh no, that wasn't me. That was my twin brother.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about in the prequel that originally Paul Dano was only supposed to play Paul, the brother from the beginning who shows up in that one scene and is like, hey, my family has oil on their land. And a different guy was playing Eli, and then they ended up recasting Paul Dano to also play Eli, and made them twins before they were just brothers or whatever. But I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, it is. He just disappears. He never shows up again. He's mentioned a couple times, but he is only in that first scene.
Yeah. Yeah, they're never together on screen, so that was nice and easy to do.
Yeah.
I guess.
So there numerous times throughout this film they do surveying, and I just want to mention surveying to me I've always felt like it's just magic.
Oh, I have no idea how that works. I have no idea how it works. It might as well be magic.
It's just the way some guy holds a pole and adjusts a little thing on it, and then another guy looks through and looked this up because I didn't know what it was called. It's called a theodolite, the little viewing thing.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what they're doing.
I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I have no idea what they're doing.
It might as well be magic.
I would love to look through one to see what are they seeing through that, because I don't know.
But that's how you make maps and map out where boundaries and stuff are. But it just seems like my brain can't parse without reading about, and I've never once looked it up to try to figure out. I've never once watched a video or anything because I don't want to know. I don't care. But usually with that kind of stuff, my brain can come up with at least because I have a pretty broad bit of knowledge about a lot of little bit of things. I can usually kind of figure out in my head what I think is going on. I have no idea what is transpiring in order for surveyors using those things and then using that to make a map. It doesn't add up in my brain.
I don't know. Nobody explain it to me.
Yeah, I don't want to know.
I don't want to know.
I don't want to know. I cannot stress enough that please do not write a comment saying, here's how surveying works. I will not read it, but it's just so it will remain magic to me. But it always cracks me up whenever I see it because I'm like, that doesn't. And the thing is, I'm sure it's not that complicated. I'm sure it's fairly straightforward to some extent. But that's what makes it more. Yeah, that's what makes it more fascinating to me. Is it has to be fairly straightforward because they've been doing it forever, and it's and the technology has not changed that much. I think now it uses lasers and stuff, but whatever. But it's just it's so weird. Anyways, fascinating.
My next note is from when HW set the cabin on fire. I just wrote, Jesus fucking Christ, that kid is a psychopath. Because he, like, poured out the gasoline and everything.
Yeah.
Like, whoa.
Yeah, he ended end of an action movie.
Yeah.
Where he like drew a trail of like gasoline and then lit it with a lighter and was like, or I guess a match.
He cranked it right up to 11 out of nowhere.
It would have been great. He like walks, so he tosses the match over his shoulder and slow mo walks away from the building. Like that's the kind of like moment you would get there normally. I do love after he murders Henry or the fake Henry. He ends up digging like a grave for him. And as he's digging it, when he gets to the bottom of it, there's oil
Yeah.
in it. I thought that was a nice little which makes sense because I talk about seepage all the time and how the oil on their land just kind of like seeps up to the surface. But yeah.
I have my own personal Lost in adaptation. How does old man Bandy know that Daniel killed fake Henry?
So my interpretation of that scene was that I think you could interpret it a couple ways. One, and the more straightforward way, I think, is that he found the gun laying on the ground and he sees the freshly dug grave.
Fair.
Because it was the night before.
Yes.
You can see where he dug a hole and filled it. Like, and he
probably didn't do a very good job.
No. He was drunk.
That's fair.
He probably just put those together. I also think you can kind of read it because I think like this guy is like, as I think you can kind of read it also as like divine inspiration because this guy, he's like, you know, his big thing is like, you got to go repent, you got to go to church and confess your sins to God. And I think you can almost kind of, and the way, I don't know if you noticed too, Daniel Plainview, he's like sitting there and he's like staring up into the sun and he keeps holding his hand up.
Yeah.
Like blocking the sun, and Bandy is like this white-haired, like godlike looking figure.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of playing with like thematically the idea that this is that God saw what you did and is speaking through Bandy.
Like playing with like religious iconography.
Yes, with that iconography. And I, like I said, I think like practically what is actually happening, because this movie I think posits a universe where God is not real. And so I think honestly it just boils down to the fact that he found the gun because he hands Daniel the gun back and he saw the freshly dug grave. So I think that's how he knows.
I will accept that as an answer.
Yeah. So I don't know if you noticed, but after the baptism, the whole big baptism scene, at the end of it, the camera's at like the back of the church. And after Daniel stands up, he turns and he says something to Eli that we cannot hear. I don't know if you noticed that during the scene, but he like turns and he says something. And I was like, I wonder if we ever know what he's like. I wonder if that's like, because I wouldn't surprise me if that was like a thing Daniel Day-Lewis did.
Yeah.
Because he just like, I'm going to do this and then I'm never going to tell anybody what I said or whatever. And I was wondering if we ever found out what he said there or if like anybody in interviews has ever asked. But then we get to the end of the film and I do think it's kind of revealed what he says there, because at the end of the movie, as he's chasing or maybe it's even before he's chasing Eli around the bowling alley, in that scene at one point he says to him, I told you I'd eat you up. Yeah. And I'm thinking that might be what he said.
Yeah, that makes
like,
sense.
I'll eat you up or something like that, which So anyways, I thought that was a very fascinating little detail, and I was like, ooh, I love little stuff like that. And I was like, okay, that's probably what that is.
Speaking of the baptism, though, I loved Daniel Day-Lewis's after being baptized.
Yes,
I did a bad impression of it, but it was very funny.
It's like he literally does the thing like a dog, like shaking his, shaking his
jowls.
His jowls, yeah. It was very funny. Or our cats do that sometimes too. When they're if you like mess with their ears and they like shake their ears. Yeah. Anyways.
The scene where he's in the restaurant with HW and we're getting like the view from the other table where the Standard Oil guy is.
Yes.
And then he said there's the holding up the menu and it's creating, I was like, wow, look at that menu creating a visual barrier between father and son in this scene. I didn't even go to film school.
You're learning
look
film
at me
language.
go.
You're learning film language. Look at you. Look at you. I also love in that scene that Daniel He has one drink of whiskey, which I think implies that he has been drinking before, because one shot of whiskey would not. The way he's talking in this scene implies that he is more intoxicated than one small drink of whiskey would get you in like 5 minutes or whatever. But he goes over there, and that scene just cracked. The way he's talking to that guy,
so uncomfortable.
It's so uncomfortable, and the way the standard oil guy is just sitting there, like, "All right, man, what are you?"
It's just like, can you just go away?
Go away. This is a Wendy's. Like, what are you doing?
It really is.
Yeah,
it really is, sir. This is a Wendy's energy.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love that. It was fantastic.
And then we both wrote the exact same note.
Yeah.
The actor who plays grown up HW is actually deaf.
Yeah.
And I looked that up while we were watching the movie, because that's something that Hollywood is very bad about.
Well, they're better now.
Yes.
But for 2007 was the post like 2015 or so that started to get better and better, where Hollywood started, and it's not like it's perfect or anything by any stretch, but it's something that Hollywood has become more and more cognizant of, is actually casting characters that are representative of the groups or the minorities or whatever that they're playing. And that was something that I thought was interesting, is that actor is like deaf and comes from a family of deaf people.
Yeah, I looked at his Wikipedia page. He was like a third generation like deaf family.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So I read a review at one point, or several of the reviews that we read in the prequel said something about the film going a bit too long and not, kind of ending in a way that they didn't like or whatever. I like the way the movie ends, but I bet what some of those critics were saying or thinking that would have been a good ending was when his son comes to confront him and he's in his big dark mansion alone.
Yeah.
I could see that also being a really good ending, where his son says to him, like, "I'm glad we're not related," whatever he said, whatever that line is. And he walks out. And just, I can imagine an ending where his son is walking out on him and you just hear him in the background yelling his insults or whatever. And that's how the movie ends, where you get a more, a less triumphant ending for Daniel, like a more like miserable ending for Daniel.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be a very like golden age of Hollywood kind of ending. I feel like it almost feels like something from Citizen Kane. Yeah.
And I will say that the ending that we get is still is the misery of like, it's not like I say triumphant ending. It's not like, it's a horrifying, like depressing. He's just a husk of a man. But I do think there he gets this big dramatic win over Eli Sunday, and like he gets to lord over him and like, be this like, he gets one more big like triumphant I drink your milkshake.
It's an interesting ending, because it's a downfall with the trappings of triumph.
Yes, which I think is really interesting, and I really, like I said, I really like the ending, but I could see an argument for having his ending being even like not giving him the "I drink your milkshake" moment,
right?
Which again, I think works in the context, because it is, like you said, it's a false triumph. It's a triumph over nothing. It's but which again I think has its own very interesting connotations for kind of what the movie is saying. But I could also see being like, that would be a good ending. Like his son just walking out on him, screaming into the void. Like that's also,
if the movie ended there, I think that would still be satisfying.
Yeah, I think it would still work. It would still be satisfying. But I don't agree with like the idea that the rest of it is bad in any way. And I don't know if I didn't see any that necessarily said that, but I saw at least one or two reviews that were like, the movie should have ended 30 minutes earlier, blah, blah, blah. Not the best ending, but anyways.
That shot of him just chugging vodka out of a bottle, though, made me feel ill.
Like a fifth of vodka, maybe not a fifth, but like, because it's like a handle.
Yeah.
And he drinks like a quarter of it.
Chugging it in like 3 seconds. Oh
nightmare.
my God.
Yeah.
At my drinkiest, I could never.
Well, and it is funny because the movie does a really good job of making him look like he's dying of alcoholism. Yes. He is like falling apart, and him just like gnawing on that overcooked cold steak. and like full of gristle. He keeps like pulling gristle out of it. Like it's all it's so good. And that's the vodka and steak that we talked about in the prequel, that apparently Paul Thomas Anderson and some of the crew every Wednesday night during post-production would eat steak and drink vodka.
I hope they ate better steak than that.
Oh yeah, I was hoping. Yeah, did they like cook their steak to like over like well done?
Like a shingle of
it is
steak.
It's black and he's like biting chunks out of it. Like it looks terrible.
He also in this scene, he calls Eli an afterbirth.
Yes,
such a hard insult. It goes so hard. I'm going to start using that.
It really does.
It's a great insult.
Yeah, no, it's very good. It's very, very good. All right, we wanted to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us there for a few bucks a month and get access to bonus content. And if you support us at $15 and up a month, you get access to priority recommendation, which this one was a request from Jeff Niederhofer. So Jeff, thank you for supporting us, and thank you for requesting There Will Be Blood. You can also do us a giant favor if you can't support us financially. Totally fine. Do us a favor. Just head over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, any of those platforms. Follow us. Comment, in particular when we post our polls and stuff. We like to get your feedback so we can talk about it in the prequel episodes. The other thing you could do, I always forget to talk about this and mention it, head over to iTunes or anywhere you listen to this podcast where you can leave a review and leave us a 5-star review. That would also be awesome and super helpful. Katie, it's time for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
I'm giving this one to the movie, but with an asterisk.
Okay.
The part of the book that the movie is based on isn't really a story in and of itself. It lays the groundwork for the rest of the book, which follows Bunny into adulthood and watches him grapple with knowing that his father conducts business immorally as he still lives off of his father's money. The book uses Bunny's perspective to track the rise and subsequent demonization of socialism following the First World War. I can't say how the movie compares to the entire book, and I'm not sure that would be a fair comparison anyway, since the book goes off in a completely different direction. If I compare the movie and the first 160-ish pages of the book 1-to-1, the movie is objectively better. It has a more complete narrative structure, it offers concrete conflicts, and it has better narrative and thematic through lines. For me, the rub is that I actually enjoyed reading the book more than I enjoyed watching the movie. I thought the book was a really interesting window into the time period, and I enjoyed Sinclair's writing style, which was easy to follow while still dropping banger poetic AF lines. If I wasn't in a place where I was having to rush to finish, I might have liked to read the entire thing. Will I? Probably not, but that's more to do with my own lack of time and mental bandwidth than the material itself. On the flip side, I honestly found the movie a little tedious. It was long, I felt like we tread over the same territory a lot, I truly did not care for the score, and I thought that the dialed up to 11 characterization of Plainview as a big bad capitalist was grating and on the nose, which is why I preferred the subtler version of him from the book. But again, objectively, I think the film is probably a better encapsulated story. So this one goes to the movie.
All right, there you go. This one's going to the film. And this is the most we've disagreed on a movie in a while, because I thought this was fantastic. Not to say you didn't think it was a good movie.
It was a well-made film that I don't ever want to watch again.
I don't know if I would ever watch it again either, but I did not have the same experience while watching it of, finding it long or tedious or, disliking. I was enraptured the whole time. I wouldn't put it as amongst the films like when we watched The Godfather for the first time. I would not put it on the same echelon of the experience I had watching that for the first time. Mm-hmm. But I would say this is a very, very good film that I thoroughly enjoyed, and just thought everything about it, basically everything about it, was like masterfully crafted. So Yeah. All right. Katie, what's next?
Up next, we're reading a picture book because your girl needs a break. We will be talking about The Story of Ferdinand, which is a book by Monroe Leaf, and its 2017 film adaptation, which I suspect is going to be terrible.
Isn't it just called Ferdinand?
Yes.
Okay.
The book is The Story of Ferdinand.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
The movie
Yes.
is just Ferdinand.
That's what I was. Yeah, I was just clarifying that the film was called because I was like, I think I've heard of Ferdinand. Is it terrible? I don't know. I actually don't remember anything about it. It's got okay reviews. Well, I mean, we'll get into this on the prequel, but I'll just say for now, it doesn't have like terrible like scores on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes and stuff. Not great, but not terrible.
I have found a lot of very recent children's films to be a little grating.
Fair enough.
But we'll see.
We'll see.
I'll give it a chance.
We will see. That will be in 2 weeks' time. In 1 week's time, we'll be hearing what you all had to say about There Will Be Blood and previewing Ferdinand / The Story of Ferdinand. So until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books.
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.